whether it happens or not, I'm reading this morning. This is the latest breaking news on Deshaun Watson, who's a Pro Bowl level quarterback. We know it's never been more of a quarterback league. I know a lot of people are saying, why are you talking about it? It hasn't happened yet. Because a lot of people I trust are saying now it's Miami, Deshaun, they've agreed to terms. Now, it doesn't mean it'll happen. Miami, Stephen Ross, the owner, wants to get resolution on some legal stuff. But Carolina's out. Miami and the Houston Texans have agreed to terms, draft picks, and all that stuff. And from what you read, they didn't have to give up nearly as much for Deshaun Watson if he did not have a mess legally staring him in the face. But this is what's interesting about this, is that when you're young, they call it a kingmaker. When you're young in any field, you're a young football coach, you're a young broadcaster, you're in politics, you're in a law firm, you need a kingmaker. You need somebody that believes in you. Because when you're young, your career is kind of turbulent, and you make more mistakes, and you know what I mean? Like, you don't dress as good as everybody else, and I didn't have any money, and I look crappy in a cheap tie, and you need somebody that believes in you. And it's very interesting in Miami, whether or not the Deshaun Watson thing happens, Tua's officially not it in Miami. It's too public. Miami, they know, everybody knows. And here's what's fascinating. Tua's been given 13 starts for a rebuilding team, right? We don't think this is a complete team. It's a rebuilding team. Here are his numbers. 66% completion percentage, almost a 90 passer rating, 18 TDs, 19 picks. Zach Wilson would die for those. Justin Fields would die for those. Daniel Jones in his first 13 starts would die for those. So, like, they're bailing on him? And by the way, they probably bailed 7 starts ago. Why? Number one is he never got any momentum. The injuries, said he didn't know the playbook. He never got any momentum. It's also an impatient owner. Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow make him look, kind of below average. The GM and the head coach have an impatient owner. They got to win now. But here's something I think is undervalued in all of this. Josh Allen at Buffalo. That Josh Allen is so tremendously gifted that Miami's coaches, Brian Flores is a defensive coach. He's faced Josh Allen at Buffalo 5 times. He's 0-5. He's been blown out 4 times, and Josh Allen has carved up his defenses. And the NFL is getting increasingly quarterback reliant, and Brian Flores is a defensive coach and says, I can't face that 2 times a year with Tua. And it reminds me, I remember when LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony came into the NBA the first year. Now, LeBron was out of high school and Carmelo was out of college. So Carmelo's offensive game was a little more sophisticated at that point. And the King games weren't on much. But I can remember it was year 2 or year 3. It was not the first year. It was year 2 or year 3. And they were both. I mean, Carmelo was crushing it in Denver. And LeBron was a phenom, right? But there were people arguing, like, because Carmelo was really turning the Nuggets around. And I watched them play a game. The Cavs played Denver, and I happened to watch a half of it. And even though they both played well, when you put them side by side, it was like, oh, this is not close. This is not close. LeBron's way more athletic, way better defensive player, a bizarrely great passer at like 21 years old. And everybody was like, if you watched them separately, Carmelo's an all-star, LeBron's great. When you put them on the floor together, it was like, okay, I know they just both scored 30. This is not close. And I think that is a big part of this. Is that when Tua, you see him, and then there's Josh Allen. Remember, Josh Rosen in Arizona only got 13 starts too. And in those 13 starts, he was on the same field as Aaron Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell Wilson. And when you put those guys on the field with Josh Rosen, and by the way, Aaron Rodgers didn't even play particularly well against him, but he made throws Josh can't. And Mahomes made throws he can't. And Russell moved around like Josh can't. And I think a big part of this is it's one thing to struggle. It's one thing to be a little small and not athletic. But I think the Josh Allen factor is a real thing. In fact, whenever you're up against greatness, It shrinks people. I mean, do you know how many coaches have been fired in the SEC since Nick Saban arrived? Like 70. It's insane. I mean, Les Miles was winning 10 games a year, and they got rid of him. Why? Because, God, he looked bad when LSU would beat everybody in that conference. God, did he look bad against Saban. And everybody's like, they can't do it. By the way, Auburn's guy. Auburn runs through coaches. They do fine. It's just not against Saban. And so when you have great and you put it up against it, same field, same conference, it shrinks everybody. Tua's numbers are not terrible. 13 starts is fairly inconclusive, but they've officially moved off him. And they're willing to risk it potentially with Deshaun Watson with all sorts of legal problems. Why? Because they feel like if you put Deshaun Watson on the same field with Josh Allen, you got a shot. It physically feels like you got a shot. Two great playmakers. I want to talk about Mike Tomlin. So Mike Tomlin yesterday came fairly unglued when he was asked about the USC job. And by the way, I'm not blaming anybody that put Mike Tomlin's name out there for the USC job. I mean, USC swinging for the fences, and that doesn't bother me. But Mike Tomlin was very, very upset about it because I went to my Twitter account, and people were like, well, what is he saying? What is he saying there when he says Sean Payton and Andy Reid, both who I love? I'll tell you what he's saying. Exactly what he said. Well, why don't you bring up Sean Payton and Andy Reid? Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Mike Tomlin all have one Super Bowl. One. Andy Reid's winning percentage is 62%. Sean Payton's is 64%. Mike Tomlin's is 65%. Well, what about division titles? Well, since Mike Tomlin came into the NFL in 2007, Andy's got 6, Sean's got 6. Oops. Mike has 7. Mike Tomlin saying, why aren't you bringing them up? I don't understand it. By the way, Sean Payton, lower winning percentage, had a better quarterback. Breeze is a much better quarterback historically. I think he holds half the records in the NFL over Big Ben. Andy's got Patrick Mahomes. Ben's not close. Is the media guilty of undervaluing Mike Tomlin? I'm guilty of this, by the way. I'm very guilty of this. I tend to glorify the offensive head coaches. Sean McVay walks in the league. I got stars in my eyes. And then Kyle Shanahan comes in the league. Kyle Shanahan. And Sean McDermott could be better than both. He's a defensive guy, and I'm like, yeah, there's a guy in Buffalo. Offense attracts us, right? Like McVay, the scheme's crazy. It looks different. We tend to, all of us, kind of really love, outside of Belichick, we all just embrace the offensive guys, not the defensive guys. But what Mike Tomlin is saying is exactly what he said. Why don't you bring up the other guys? And here's where Mike Tomlin has had to deal with something that I don't think's ever been discussed. One of the beliefs, the other day when I was on this call with Tom Brady and a bunch of reporters, somebody brought this up. I forget who it is. I apologize. Somebody brought it up. It was a good point. They say the toughest players to coach in football are aging star quarterbacks. Jimmy Johnson and Dan Marino, great example. Big Ben, the last 3.5 years, and this needs to be noted, has been awful. 3.5 years is not a short period of time in the NFL. A coach gets 2 years. If he doesn't win, he's fired. In 3.5 years, Big Ben is 20th in completion percentage, 21st in passer rating. Do you realize that's including all the rookie quarterbacks the last 3.5 years? That's bad. And there's no succession plan. And Ben is high maintenance and a lot of drama. So when people say, well, what is Mike Tomlin saying? Exactly what he said. We probably should not include a Hall of Fame coach. And it's not going to be a lot of years before he gets in. What is it, 5 years you got to get voted in? Mike's not going to be sitting on the beach waiting to be voted into the Hall of Fame. Either is Sean Payton and either is Andy Reid. Mike was saying exactly what he said. Come on now. Mike Tomlin, a college job in the Pac-12? He's right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.